So let me just quickly introduce our panelists today. First, we have with us S.V. Nathan. Nathan is a partner and chief talent officer at Deloitte India. He is a member of the India leadership team and serves on the talent executive leadership of Deloitte Asia Pacific. He has over 30 years of experience in HR management across diverse industries, including manufacturing, services, telecom, and IT, and is a well-known industry leader, mentor, and advocate of ethical leadership. And a behavioral specialist in sensitivity training, he's been acknowledged as one of the top voices of LinkedIn 2020. He also serves as the chairman of Sumedas, a non-profit education and research body devoted to organizational development, and previously served on the board of the National HR Development Network as its national secretary. He's an avid reader and writer. He's a regular blogger and has an active presence on social media. Many of you might have seen his Office Truths posts on LinkedIn. And what's more, he loves shopping for others and cooking for family and friends. So welcome, Nathan. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you.
Next up, we have with us Shikha Gupta. Shikha says that she's an engineer by education from Jivaji University, but a human resource professional by choice with an MBA from IISWBM. She is currently the HR leader for Schneider Electric India, responsible for strategic business partnerships, change management, coaching, and leading the D&I agenda for her organization. And now, with almost 10 years in Schneider, she's done multiple domestic and international roles in HR, spanning across HR generalist, talent acquisition, competency management, talent management, and organizational development. And as a seasoned professional with more than 20 years of HR experience, she's known for driving people strategies, maximizing their potential, and enabling the business to deliver great results. Previously, she's also worked with other eminent organizations like WNS, Global Services, JP Morgan Chase, Wipro, and Infosys. Welcome, Shikha. Lovely to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to the discussion.
The next person I'd love to introduce is Sonali Gupta, psychologist and author of Anxiety, Overcome It and Live Without Fear, one of India's leading clinical psychologists with over 16 years of experience. And her new book, Anxiety, Overcome It and Live Without Fear, was released very recently in May this year with the noted publisher HarperCollins in both paperback and Kindle formats. Many of you who read the Mumbai Mirror would be very familiar with her weekly column, Terms of Engagement, which focuses on love, intimacy, relationships, and mental health in general. She's also the official consulting psychologist for Tinder India and advises several leading businesses in addition to her own practice at Kharan Mahalakshmi in Mumbai. And Sonali works with young adults, artists, couples, as well as corporates to enhance one's emotional well-being, especially at the intersection of relationships, grief, and anxiety. And her YouTube channel, Mental Health with Sonali, is extremely popular with over 50,000 subscribers, so do check it out. She's very passionate about, ending the stigma around mental health in India, something that's really needed. Welcome, Sonali. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Aparna. So looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
And finally, we have with us the always amazing Anusha Singh, lawyer turned corporate consultant and a columnist. She helps organizations across sectors speak to their stakeholders effectively. She's an ardent believer in equal opportunity, and her work on gender and life's nuances has appeared in leading publications including the Hindustan Times, the Hindu, Women's Web, and Tribe Global. Featured on Humans of Bombay, she says that she sleeps tight after feeding all things feathered and furry in the streets. Welcome, Anusha. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Aparna. Thank you.
And with that, over to you, Anusha.
Thanks, Aparna. Thank you. A very warm welcome once again to Nathan, Shikha, and Sonali. And all the attendees here, please, we cannot wait to hear your comments, your chats, your statements as the session goes forward. And yes, there is a separate tab for questions, so please keep your questions there. So it's easy for me to pick up at the end of the session from there. Don't put it in chat. And in chat, of course, we would love to hear your views as the session proceeds. All right. So Nathan, Shikha, and Sonali, I'll begin the conversation here. In fact, inviting a greater understanding on the very theme of our conversation right now, which is the art of saying no and being more strategic at work. Now, all of us know that being strategic is extremely important, and even more important considering that a lot of us are looking at moving towards leadership roles. Now, a relevant part about being strategic is also knowing when to say no and then actually saying it. And for women across sectors, there is a challenge. Women do face a difficulty in saying no to work that probably appears to be unfairly allotted, or it's a simple case of just being overburdened, or you're too busy and difficult to take it all. But still, it's hard to say no. And this is not unique to the current times when we are all working virtually and 24/7, your personal and professional is merged and we are struggling with it. It was pretty much the situation even when women were working, going to offices physically. So your thoughts on it, if we could begin with you, Nathan.
So I believe that one of the most important things that one learns to manage if one has to be strategic is, particularly at work, you got to do some 3 or 4 things. One is, how do you manage time? Second one is, how do you really become more influential? Become a person of gravitas. The third one is, how do you build relationships and network? So if there were top 3 things, I would just put these 3. Because all these will clearly tell you where you ought to be investing your time, where you will invest your energies, where you will invest your resources.
Mm-hmm.
You become influential because you're able to interject at the right time. You're able to take the conversation to the right point of inflection where people start to look at you and say, hey, that person said something which really made a big difference, and you're able to steer the conversation suitably. Many times we just we don't know how to say no, and we don't know how to say no because it could be coming in from a friend of yours, very close friend. Hey, can you do this for me? And there are some people who I call as a quintessential outsourcers. You give them any task, they will outsource it to somebody else. And as you were studying somewhere, I'm sure that you and I have been on projects galore, right? There'll always be somebody out there who will ask of others to do the heavy lifting, and they will watch and they will pretend that they're going to do all that stuff. Don't get sucked into it.
Yeah.
Because the one that we really have to ourselves is this precious commodity, time. You don't have to go too far. Look what is happening in our COVID times. COVID has really taught us the value of time, the value of what we really need most in our lives. So you start to put things and say, this is more important, this is less important, and then you start to work on these things. You also start to work on if there is something where you have to say no. Many of us suffer from this problem. When do I really say no? More importantly, how do I say no? Because this matter of how is a lot about EQ. Is about how do I say so that it doesn't hurt the person really understands that, look, I don't have time, I'm stretched, I'm not able. Then the matter of how comes in. The third one is, when you say no, always leave something in the nature of an option. Where the person says, yes, I think the person is right, they're not able to do something, but they have given me a lead. So with these initial thoughts, let me turn this back to you.
Thanks, Nathan. I think the whole perspective of bringing it from the value of time is extremely critical. I think that's very critical to being strategic. And as you rightly said, more so in the current times when we are working virtually, and we've realized, a lot of people have realized what really matters. And that spills over in how you work.
I'll give you an example. The greatest management guru that you and I went through in our initial studying days, Peter Drucker, right?
Yep.
So there's this gentleman called Eric Barker who wanted to write a book, and he wrote a mail to about some 300 odd people seeking their views on a whole host of things, on some 3-4 questions and all that. And he expected that Drucker would write back to him. Drucker did not respond at all. And he just chanced upon Drucker in some kind of a meeting, and he said, "Hey, Mr. Drucker, you didn't respond to this." So he says, "That was my polite way of saying no, because I don't have time. If you're looking at productivity, then that's the easiest thing for me to ignore the things, because we are living in an age of mass distractions.
Yeah.
So we've got to find a way to focus on what is really important." Back to you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nathan. Shikha, your thoughts?
Well, I think very valid and thought-provoking inputs from Nathan. I just want to add a couple of points from a woman's perspective, and also having observed so many women in my last 12 years of work in the diversity field, I have observed that women specifically find it difficult to say no. And there are multiple reasons behind it, and maybe in the course of conversation today, we will go deeper into those. But the fact remains, and for all the participants who are seeing or listening, first recognize that there is this challenge of saying no with you specifically, and where is it stemming from? Because unless I understand where is it coming from, there is hardly anything I will be able to do about it. Connecting it back to the point of strategic perspective that you started your conversation with, I think strategy is also about being able to spot trends, being able to connect the dots, being able to appreciate and understand what's happening around you, and then to apply it to your current situation. And that requires time. That requires time to network, like Nathan said. That requires time to read up. That requires time to connect. That requires time to understand. If I continue accepting whatever is coming my way, valuable or not valuable, where is the time to invest on developing my strategic perspective? So again, if I want to be more strategic, if you want to be more strategic, first and foremost, free up that energy that you have limited amount of energy, right? All of us have. So free up that energy and get out of the fear of not being seen as somebody not nice or not willing to stretch. Stretch, I think, is the most overused word in corporate. So just get out of that and start focusing on what matters to you and for the ecosystem that you are in. That's it. Back to you, Anusha, for now.
Thanks, Shikha. Very simply put, especially this bit about it's all right to be not to be seen nice, which I think a lot of women will relate to. It's just grilled in their heads for various reasons. And definitely recognizing the challenge goes to the heart of it. To be aware of the situation that you are, you're finding it hard to say no, and then going to the root of it as the starting point. Sonali, your thoughts on the scenario?
Yes, so in therapy, a lot of men and women reach out for therapy because they find it very hard to say no. So I think to begin with, for everybody who struggles with it, I think it's okay to understand that it's a process. You learn how to say no. And I don't think, all of us grew up in environments where we were taught to say no. At least I can speak for myself. I think it's a process of working and learning it to begin with. And you can learn it, so that's a silver lining. I think the second bit is, when I conduct workshops, I run this exercise where, and maybe everybody can just take a quick moment and think of what gender comes to your mind when you hear these terms. When you hear accommodating, when you hear empathy, when you hear clear understanding of finances, firm, assertive. If you have written it down, you can let us know in the chat window. But often, agreeableness, these are qualities people will associate with women. And they often also expect women leaders to be agreeable. to the extent where ambition or being strategic are sometimes looked upon as not such positive terms to begin with. So I think, I think the last point, and I'm sure we're going to discuss more, when we say, I often feel one needs to, when you say no, as Shikha said, and as, Nathan also said, Nathan said, sorry,
Thank you.
yeah, that it may be identify the opportunity cost when I'm saying yes to something. It's an opportunity cost, so maybe I do need to say no. So identifying the opportunity cost. I think also, I think a lot of invisible work ends up happening in the process of saying yes to everything. And I think both men and women end up doing, and women far more doing far more invisible work. And adding to what everybody said, I feel you need to read the room. You need to learn how to communicate a no by softening the startup. So I often tell clients, okay, you have every right to say no, but you can figure ways to soften the startup, start the process of communication, and you can say no in a manner where you are not personalizing it, you're not cutting ties with the person. So I think it's an art also of saying no, as the title says. Yes, and move it to Anusha back to take it from here. Yes.
Lovely, lovely, Sonali. Yeah, I mean, you rightly identified that's why it's not how to say no, it's really the art of saying no, because that also deals with the how of it. And one didn't realize, in fact, I think it was a blind spot even in my mind, that being strategic is also not seen as a very, as a positive quality. Again, it all flows from the whole conditioning bit. And
yeah, I was just, I think strategic can easily become manipulative and being too playing games when strategic is not that, right?
Exactly. It requires vision, it requires intelligence, it requires reading between the lines. It's not about being manipulative or sharp. But yeah, exactly, that's all culturally, which actually leads me pretty much to my conversation with Nathan, because I wanted to ask you, Nathan, especially coming from your perspective as an active gender equality evangelist, while you've been spearheading and are spearheading HR roles across the industry, if you could share your thoughts on women's habits in the context of the difficulty of saying no. So when I say that, especially now, as Sonali has also brought out this point on the strategic and how the outlook towards strategic is, do you believe that the ability to say no, or the difficulty to say no, is not really individual personality driven, but it's much more cultural? As Shikha also said, and earlier, that it's a lot about what you're taught over a period of time. So
yeah, absolutely. I think Sonali touched upon something very, very important. Culture is the one which is belief in action. So Shikha said this in a different way, but all of us, we are aware that all of what we think and our beliefs and the way we act, and that's something that's about culture. What happens really at a workplace is, if we can really find a way where people start to believe that this is the way that we can all be working together, then in a way you have influenced culture. All of us have, deep down, there are things that have been handed down through several generations. For instance, I'll give an example. People, whenever they meet me, they will always say, they won't call me Nathan, they will always sir me, sir. And in an American company where I worked for some 15 odd years, I was always Nathan to the person who came in the day before yesterday and joined the firm, the person who's the managing director of the firm. Everybody called me the same thing, because that's about culture. But if you're working in another organization where traditionally it's about how you move up, then it's very difficult for people to say Nathan. So today, what we have to do is we have to create environments. We have to find way of influence. For example, Sonali, what we have done in Deloitte is that all meetings where we have, there is a round circle, and we put an equal to sign. It's a very simple thing. And what we convey through that is to say men are equal to women. It's not saying women are equal to men, because that has a different connotation.
Yes.
Men are equal to women. And in meetings, we always, so inclusion is important. Anusha, inclusion is going to be important. If you're in a virtual meeting, you ask this question, hey, have I really checked with somebody? And have I really made sure that their voice is heard? And if you can find it was earlier easier. If you're sitting in a room, you could read the body language, right?
Absolutely.
Now I have to read people's eyes. It's difficult, right? I've got to look at the face and then make something with it. And today, this is what we are in a way, I'm not saying teaching, but I'm saying we are learning from each other. They're saying if there is somebody who has got a slight disquiet, it'll show on the face and say, hey, listen, it appears that you may not be in agreement with this. Would you want to speak? Would you want to say more? So unless you start to stoke and really set out and in a genuine way, in an authentic way, people will not come and people will not say what's on the mind. But once it happens, twice it happens, third time around, nobody will hesitate. So it takes efforts. So all of whatever that we do, first it starts with awareness at one end, then slowly builds up a practice, then it becomes a habit, after which you don't have to worry too much. Somewhere interspersed in all of this is this word called respect. When you start to respect another person, regardless of whether the person is a male or a female, then you're sending out a very strong signal. So once you get that respect as part of any transaction, then it becomes a lot easier. And by the way, it's not just with male, female, men and men. Why? Because there is a lot of things about the power distance, right? How am I supposed to do with my boss? And my boss, he'll come and cloud me with his power. How do I manage that? How do I really respect people genuinely? Can go along.
Wonderful. Yeah, definitely. I mean, authenticity lies at the heart of any initiative, and especially when we are talking of when you're talking of culture and the pillars that have formed the culture, and we are talking of changing the culture, it requires that kind of awareness, conscious efforts, and there's a process to it. There's a process to it, and especially now when we are working virtually, as you rightly pointed out, when we are having this conversation now, that is how at the beginning it's so important that yes, the attendees will be chatting here, yes, the attendees will be commenting, we must answer them. It's not about us what we say, it's about what they think. So the whole inclusiveness, all of it comes together. Shikha, I'm taking you to a slightly different plane because I think we are pretty much in sync with our conversations here. I'll take you to a slightly different plane around driving people's strategies. You have been doing that since a while. You've been maximizing people's potential. And even though you introduced yourself very humbly backstage, we know where you are and what all you've been doing over the years. So your perspective really on working with teams, for example, if you've seen examples of how teams and their attitudes were different when they worked with teams that had gender balanced ecosystems. For example, you've got male and female equal numbers in the team, and then you've got teams that are more larger majority of males and lesser females. So typically what happens, how does it impact the attitudes of women and men towards saying no, and to men also, because their attitude changed, that maybe they just think that probably it's the woman will not say yes to everything.
Okay, yeah, sure. In fact, I would take it just one level higher and say not only about men and women, but also people coming from different cultures. In just my previous role, I was working in a team, I was managing a team which had participants from 5 different cultures, ranging from China till US. So you can imagine the diversity of environment, upbringing, etc. And I specifically am choosing this example because there's a question on the chat referring to environmental impacts and the culture. Now, definitely, I mean, I'm not even going to get into the research, which so much of research that talks about how more diverse and inclusive teams are more contributing, more impactful, business results are better, etc., etc. That's well understood and well accepted.
Yep.
What I'm telling you is a live examples that I experienced, and just to show how an inclusive team can make a real difference. So I was HR of an R&D organization in Schneider, and that was in 5 different countries, like I said, US, France, Germany, India, and China. And maybe 2 people in Middle East. So it was a fairly diverse team. It was a good combination of men and women. In fact, I realized that irrespective of cultures, there are certain nuances which are very common across the globe when we start talking about gender specificities. I'm not even saying differences. There is specificity. Each of us have our own sort of composition, chemical or whatever. We have our own composition, and we react according to that. Probably Sonali is more qualified than me to comment on that. But what I realized is, and this team was working on designing a circuit breaker, that one of the businesses that Schneider is in, which would be acceptable across the globe. And I have seen the evolution of this team from the time when it was only in France and Germany and pretty male dominated to today when it is fairly diverse. You know, and it's a fact that the team in France and Germany, mostly men, few women, came up with a circuit breaker which was extremely robust, temperature resistance, will work across the globe, whatever are the weather conditions, etc., etc. And the version 1 did not do so well in the European markets.
Okay.
The latest version, which was launched, I think, 2.5 years back, it had a more diverse team for sure, more women, more participation from different cultures. And the biggest feature which the product had, which made it a winner, is that it had a cover which could be adapted depending on the design of the wallpaper. That was the only thing. That was the only significant difference. All other robustness, everything remained the same. It's just that nobody from that previous team thought about the aesthetics. And then this reverse team comes by and they are able to think about the aesthetics. So that's the power, you know, a diverse team brings in. Coming back very quickly to the question that you said, do I feel that more inclusive teams are giving more power to people to say no? Absolutely, definitely, without any doubt. I have experienced it. I have worked in teams where I was the only person who was a woman. I was the only person not speaking a specific language or coming from a specific part of the country. And nobody expected me to say yes. Like no one said that you have to say yes to everything. But somehow I took it upon myself, oh, what would everybody think? You know, I need to be accepted in this team. And hence, I would say yes to everything, even if it meant standing with all these people in the smoking zone and being the passive smoker. Just because I wanted to feel to be a part of way back in my career. Cut that to today when I'm in a more diverse team. I feel that I'm more confident to say no, and I know that the younger people in the team who are just entering the workforce are more confident to say no because they have role models. And I think as corporates and as individuals, I think we've not created enough strong role models for people to. We've created our visions of perfection. We've created sort of these holier than thou or bigger than life personalities, but we've not created practical role models on the which a diverse team gives you an opportunity to create. So that's why I feel it's easier.
Yeah, beautiful, Shikha. I think extremely useful because you've given real live examples of teams being diverse and the impact that it has had, whether it's productivity or it is a different a value add to an asset, which was similarly created by another. And this is extremely helpful, Shikha. Thanks. And of course, very candid that you mentioned this, that, just the need to be accepted is a very critical thing in the head, which constantly pushes you to keep saying yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think every human being has that need. Well, even members of animal kingdom have this need to be accepted, to be appreciated, to be loved, and then we are willing to do very many things at times to reach that space.
And that I think that's not sustainable in the long run.
Exactly.
All right, I'll move to Sonali. Sonali, your experience coming from a pure clinical psychologist experience, you've been working with men and women both, of course, across professions, across lifestyles. We've heard of your stellar bio, and congratulations on the new book, which came
Thank
out
you.
4 months back. Your out of all your counseling sessions and people who who benefited from your therapy, what are the most common reasons that you have found over a period of time that have made it so hard for women to say no? So we talked about in the session that awareness is so important, so probably our attendees will quickly catch, okay, probably that was my reason. So it will help people to reach that first step. And also very much interested if you could conclude by telling your perspective on the impact that it has, that inability to say no, the impact that it has on women, especially from mental health perspective.
Okay, definitely. I think let me start, from what you ended with. I think, the ability to say no, I think it's not just at the workplace. Even when it comes to, I mentioned this in the book, a simple thing, a friend calls you for dinner, you are not in mood for a dinner, you just want to go for a drink. People will play the scenario 5 times in their head before they put it on a message.
Yes.
Or they will say,
Yes.
yeah, let's talk about it, and nobody will be clear and the other person doesn't get it. So I think both men and women, and I don't think it's just the workplace that people struggle with. So one immediate impact is anxiety, right? Like people go over, you're wasting so much of your energy just going over and over the same thing. So one is energy. The second is almost a self-doubt, and going back to what Shikha said, I think acceptance and belonging are two of the reasons that make it so hard to say no. If I say no, how are others going to perceive me? Will I not fit into this group? Third is, I think, and with a lot of women particularly, I don't think we have been trained to self-care. When you get married, and if there are married people on the group, they would know. A lot of times your mom would say, घर पे सबका ध्यान रखना, जिस घर पे जा रहे हो, आपकी शादी हो रही है, take care of everyone. Like, I often listen to it and I wonder, like, why aren't you told that take care of yourself also? You need to take care of yourself. The same analogy of the flight, right? You put the mask on yourself before you put the mask on, your child, your baby, anyone. So I think the second reason is that, we haven't been taught to self-care. So in my eyes, saying no is an act of self-care. So often with men and women both, I say that integrate it as a part of your self-care. It needs to, at the same time, you can say no. One of my earliest bosses, when I used to work in, Kamasipura with children of sex workers, before I joined the job, she told me, be firm yet gentle. They are a vulnerable group. And I think I've held on to it, that you can be firm, you can say no, and yet you can be gentle with people. It doesn't need, I think there's a huge difference between aggressiveness and assertiveness. I don't think they are the same. I think also, I think a lot of people carry a lot of irrational beliefs about saying no. If I say no, I will be considered to be not a good person, not a helpful person. So, what has your family taught you about helpfulness? What, will I come across as someone who's trying to be dominating? Have I not justified myself? There is no, I would have anyways rested. So I often tell people, even during the pandemic, people say, I was not doing anything, I was just lying down. I'm like, okay, if you were lying down, that's also your rest. You don't need to answer a message at that time, right? So I think we don't account for opportunity cost when it comes to saying no. And, like both what, both the other speakers have been saying, I think it's most important to create a culture where organizations reinforce you even when you have said no, and in turn tell you how it helps in the context of a larger strategy. And I realize there's limited time. Being diplomatic and tactful both work at the end of the day, and they will allow you to work in the long run. I don't know, just a quick, I'll end with this. There's a book called The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. There's a new version to the book which has come. The book is about this tree, this boy who keeps asking, and the tree keeps giving everything. The new alternative ending to it, and I could send it to Ruchi, Aparna, the team, is how by giving consistently and by not saying no, in the long run, there'll be nothing left of you to give.
Yeah.
That's the 2020 ending for it. The book came out ages back, so I'm going to send it to all of you.
Thanks, Sonali. Very, very pertinent points. I mean, such simple things, but extremely important to incorporate. The whole need for acceptance, the saying no is a part of self-care. I think that's a beautiful statement. I think it's a powerful statement for everybody to take away, that saying no is actually an act of self-care.
Thank you.
There is someone who is. I'll just take in one question in between, because very related to what you're saying. A person has said, Rachna Gupta has asked that saying no once, people might digest, but for saying no multiple times, how do you make sure you're able to say no without feeling guilty and being judged? It's so much in sync with the whole perspective. I mean, what would you tell this person? What would you tell Rachna?
Okay. So I have a wonderful woman who works with me. Her name is Beni Benaifer Irani, and she is my assistant. Every morning I load her up with a heck of a lot of work. So much work, you sometimes start to wonder how she manages this. Now, there are times when I learned so much from her. When at a point when she believes that she cannot take more, she will tell you in a very gentle way. She says, is this okay? She will give you alternatives. She will say, is it okay if I give this to you by so and so time? Can I move this to tomorrow? Is it okay if I don't do this? Can you give this to somebody else? Because it's just that it's impossible for me to do this. And she will give you, and the way that she says it is something that I'll sit back and think, my God, I wish I had that sagacity. And she says it with a smile. It's almost like you think back and say, hey, I wish I had that when I had to say no to people. So I really believe that you can say no. It's not about just how you're received or not being received. It's also about checking the implications. How will I be received? What's going to happen up and down? That's fine. But the way that you say no with alternatives, I think that opens up a completely new way of, forget the other person having said no. For the person who is giving work, he'll start to think, oh my God, I should have thought about a few things before I keep loading people with something.
Exactly. Beautifully put. Exactly. That is why, I mean, I think firm and gentle, as Sonali said, is absolutely possible. Anything you'd like to add, Shikha, here?
Just one point to add on the point of feeling guilt and inadequate because you are saying no. I have learned it over, I think, over 15 years that okay, it is okay to be not perfect. It is okay to not come across as perfect. There are 3 questions that I have put in chat, which are the questions I normally ask myself when I have a strong urge to please others. I go through those questions in my head and I say, is it going to give me additional learning? Is it would I be enjoying doing something even if it is not giving me learning, but I would enjoy doing this? And thirdly, will it take significant time and resources away from whatever is my current focus area? And if I find my answers telling me that, hey, it doesn't matter whether people like you or not like you are sorted in your head about these 3 priorities that you have, and hence go ahead and say no. And trust me, this 3-question formula has worked for me for the longest time.
This is fantastic. I have myself made a note of it. Everybody, please, this is very helpful. It's like very strategically you've structured, positively strategically you've structured those questions, and you know the answers then. Then you don't have to like keep going into the loop, as Sonali said, which constantly takes away your time and energy from everything else.
Yeah. And then you're convinced of whatever decision you've made, whether you've said yes or no, you're convinced of the relevance of that decision to you.
Yes. Sonali, any suggestion you want to give to attendees here? Another one's question is, will it be taken as you're incapable that you're of doing it, and then they'll stop coming to you for another work? How do you manage that? It's so much of mind games happening, right?
Absolutely. I think it's important, to also understand if somebody is not hearing a no and still asking you things couple of times over and over again, then that also is a red flag sometimes, right? So one, that. Second, you may also have to look at what's the precedent are you setting if you're saying yes to something. So if I say yes to something, does it mean I'll be asked to do this again and again? And thirdly, I think when, struggling with guilt, I think it helps sometimes to articulate even to the other person where you are. Like during the pandemic, when people are having a mental health crisis, I would like to see a lot of people. And often I say, I am myself very stretched. And I don't think this end, in the long run, I'm not going to sustain this. So adding to what, Shikha said, I ask myself, in the long run, would I be able to sustain this?
Yeah.
In the long run, is the guilt, if my guilt is dealt, but would I feel resentfulness for doing this? So if I feel that I'm going to feel resentfulness, bitterness, or feel that I'm overwhelmed, I don't end up doing that. And I think my last tip would be, when you're unsure, pick the phone, do it over the call, don't do it over the text. Text has no tonality. Just pick the phone. If you know the person based on your relationship, discern when to call and when to text. A text can be perceived. We don't know what the other person is feeling.
Correct.
And you have to learn to develop a thicker skin, filter the feedback. Even if other people say see your no as something as against you, then you have to work on yourself to filter the feedback thrown at you. Then I think that's part of strategy too.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Sonali. I don't want this to suddenly shut off. So thank you so much, Sonali, Shikha, and Nathan. Thank you so much for taking the questions. And bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
This was lovely.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye. All the best.